Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. And thank you so much for the opportunity given for us to present our research. This research is a result of staff-student collaboration, which was funded by an urban project, which is university project that supports student and staff research. So our topic is using student journals as a teaching technique. So we studied the use of student journals at undergraduate levels in the context of reflection, critical thinking, and student engagement. A little bit of context, reflection as a learning method has its roots in social constructivism. It's an education movement that dates back to the early 20th century, and more specifically, the work of John Dewey and his seminal work entitled Democracy and Education. So John Dewey's argument basically is that all humans learn from experience, but also we need to do things, and doing the things actually helps us solving the real problems. So in other words, he believes that solving the real problems should be the basis of education. So he was one of the first advocates to introduce reflection as a process of stepping back and thinking more constructively about what we've learned, what we have learned and how we've learned it, and what we would have done otherwise in particular. So his work drives the main arguments of this research, but we started from the notion that reflection is a relatively neglected phenomenon, in particular as a teaching technique in the wider agenda of tourism, hospitality, and event students. I'm part of the events, tourism, and hospitality department at the University of Northampton, and that's why we've decided to focus this research on final year undergraduate students studying tourism, hospitality, and events. So within the domain of hospitality and events in particular, there is a need of more practice-based education, and very often we need to reflect on the decision-making process. In that case, a reflection could be a very useful technique to be implemented. So writing self-assessment reports are good for critical thinking, but on a different note, there is a limited use of reflection within our context. We did our research in the aftermath of the pandemic, in the very early days after we moved on campus. And as we all know, the pandemic has brought many challenges in terms of how we as educators teach and communicate. And still there is a notable gap in terms of how students communicate with the tutors online and offline. We learned that we could teach, we could deliver, we could support our students, but when it comes to communication, we didn't learn much about what could be a suitable alternative to the direct face-to-face communication. So we thought that having a reflective journal can potentially engage students and make them more responsible for their learning, while at the same time it could provide them a little bit different interaction with their tutors. So as we know, students progress through their education. They're expected to practice, enhance, develop their skills, including critical thinking and reflection skills as well. So in addition, journal writing is also often used to engage students, to place responsibility for active engagement, and also increase student self-confidence and motivation to study. It could also provide an opportunity for more informal one-to-one dialogue between the tutor and the student, one thing which we were very keen to explore in the context of online teaching and learning. So our aim was to explore the potential of using journals to promote reflection, critical thinking, and student engagement. And we had a few objectives: to explore the use of journals as a tool to facilitate those skills, to examine the potential contribution of journal writing to develop arguments, summaries, and standpoints, and also to explore how journal writing can facilitate a more meaningful student-tutor interaction. So our methodology was divided into three parts. So we introduced the journals on Blackboard, which is a platform that we use. We also showed examples of its use from elsewhere. We use a semester-long observation in terms of student input, so how students use the journal and for what purpose. And then we did 2 focus groups, 12 students altogether, and talk more qualitatively about the blog format, the contents, the engagement, the student input, challenges, recommendations for further use. So the student perspective, what we found is that with some students, there was a limited engagement, basic use, lack of contents. With others, there were multiple uses, very structured student input. The journal was used as a summary of learning points, like a learning diary. It was also used as student-tutor communication. For example, some students used the journal to put their draft assessment, asking for Q&A, and then the instructors were able to ask for further input or just provide feedback. So good practice. We found it was a good prep for assessment, especially the formal assessment tool worked really well. Some students were able to express themselves freely in a more informal setting. To quote one of the respondents, journal use was a way for me to get organized, a way to structure my learning as well. On the negative side, there was a lack of engagement. Some students said it was time consuming, they didn't know what to do, and it was often viewed as an activity outside class hours. With others, they refused to do it because it was not assessed formally. So our perspective also is that journals needs to be more integrated into the workshops, but not into the assessment. Most students found that they already used the deflection, but not in a writing format. Those who started using the journal found it very useful to actually track their learning and progress. The overall verdict is it's a very useful tool, but it needs more efforts to be integrated. So thank you so much for your time. In case you have any questions, you can always email me at nicknaumov@northampton.ac.uk. Thank you so much for your time.